Screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Can you all see that? Yeah.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, super duper. Okay, I'm going to talk a little about, we've just seen some fantastic film about biodiversity in the coral reefs around Australia. And often that's what we think about when we think about marine biodiversity, but we have lots of marine biodiversity around the Irish coastline too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about citizen science and specifically marine citizen science as well. My name is Dave Walls, so I am Citizen Science Officer with the National Biodiversity Data Centre. What's that, I hear you say? Well, the National Biodiversity Data Centre, essentially we work to make biodiversity data freely available to help better understand and assist in the protection and conservation of Ireland's biodiversity. So we gather in data, process it, and put it out there through a mapping system. Our home on the interweb is biodiversityireland.ie. So if you're interested in finding out more, that's where you'll find us. So what do you think about when you think about marine biodiversity, especially around Ireland? Because you might think instantly tropical reef, but we don't have those here. So do you think, for example, is it all the fish in the sea, like these saits swimming off Puffin Island in County Kerry? Or maybe you think about bigger things like dolphins, like these common dolphins swimming in the seas of Southwest Cork. Or perhaps you think bigger still and think about the biggest thing that's ever lived on the face of planet Earth, which is the blue whale. These blue whales were photographed by the Irish Air Corps a few years ago, swimming off the west coast of Ireland, and they regularly pass through Irish waters. So some of you may think about those things, but how many of you, when you're thinking about marine biodiversity, would think about seaweeds? So around the Irish coast, we have something like 600 seaweed species, ranging from the stuff you find on the seashore to different species you find down into deeper waters. These are incredibly important for biodiversity, marine biodiversity, because they create the habitats. They're like the forests. They create the habitats in which all the other plants and animals live. Or do you think about the plankton that absolutely fills our oceans and indeed is responsible for the greatest migration on the face of planet Earth? So these plankton, in their billions and billions, migrate each night up into surface waters off the Irish coast, and there they forage all night long. And when the sun rises, they disappear down into the depths again, where it's safer, and they're out of the reach of surface predators. So maybe you think of some of those things, maybe you think of all of those things. And indeed, when we say marine biodiversity, what we mean is the variety of life in our oceans. So that's everything from the smallest bacteria up to the biggest animal, the blue whale. Let me introduce you then for a few minutes to some of the weird and wonderful creatures that form part of Ireland's marine biodiversity. Okay, then, they are just a few of the species that I've encountered over the years, traveling around the Irish coastline, diving, looking at intertidal stuff, snorkeling. So there's lots of ways to encounter marine biodiversity around the Irish coastline. So in 2019, with this in mind, we set up Explore Your Shore, which is a citizen science project funded by the Environmental Protection Agency. The main focus of the project is looking at marine species as indicators of climate change, which you heard earlier in the Australian context, and also water quality, because these species react to both changes in habitats. But from the data center's point of view, we're also looking at filling data gaps, because you may think that we know everything nowadays with all our techno wizardry and gadgetry and various types of imagery and whatnot, satellites, but still we have very little information on a whole array of species that occur around the Irish coast, particularly in intertidal waters and in shallow coastal waters. We have lots of data gaps. Would you believe me if I told you that the last time we did a major survey of intertidal and shallow subtidal species in Ireland was in the mid-90s? That's when I was a young whippersnapper in university. None of you were alive, and most of your teachers hadn't been born yet. So there's a long period between surveys potentially. And, you know, the data that was collected back then is kind of now ancient history, and we need new data. We need to set a new baseline and understand where these different species occur around the coast. To give you an example of how kind of sparse the information was, when we started this project, we had something like 400 in the data center databases. We had 400 records of beadlet anemone. Beadlet anemone is a little red sea anemone that lives on the shore all around the Irish coastline, incredibly common. There's not a shore it doesn't occur on, and yet we've only 400 records. At the same time, we had 11,000 records of red fox, which, although they're all cutesy and everyone knows what a red fox looks like, try spotting one. They're nocturnal, so they're hard to spot. They're also incredibly shy in most areas outside of cities. But despite that, we had so many records of foxes and yet very little records of beadlet anemone and a whole range of marine species. So established Explore Your Shore. Its home on the interweb is exploreyourshore.ie. So you go there and find out any further information on the project. So we set that up kind of as the main hub for engaging with Explore Your Shore. What is citizen science then? How does it differ to normal science? Is it normal science? Maybe it is. Citizen science is the general public, me, you, anybody doing science and making discoveries. It involves finding out things and generating real scientific results. So basically, it generates data that gives us answers to questions that we have. Both the professionals or the researchers, often in universities or state agencies, and the citizen scientists should benefit from taking part in the project, either through increased knowledge, shared knowledge, training, and so on. And the citizen scientists should receive feedback, so you don't just give in your data and never hear anything again. So you should have good feedback on where your data is going. And that data, that information at the end of the project, or indeed during the project, should be open access. What do we mean by that? Well, it means that once it's validated, once the quality control is done, it should be available to anyone who wants to use it. Why do we use citizen science rather than pay some university researchers or some commercial consultancies to do the things we want to do? Well, we can do that. Generally, it involves hiring a few people to do lots of survey work. And the problem with that is that takes a long time because there's an awful lot of coastline around the Irish coast. And it also costs a lot of money, and that money is hard to come by. With citizen science, what we're asking people to do is people who already live by the coast to do a little bit. So to gather a little bit of research, throw it into a pool, and once we get that pool all together, we generate a much bigger picture and wider picture. Unfortunately for us, that costs a lot less money, so it's an easier task for us to do. The other thing with citizen science is that if you have to pay lots of money to commercial consultancies or researchers, generally you're only going to be able to do that for a few years just because budgets are finite. Whereas because you can do citizen science on a kind of a shoestring budget, long-term data sets can be produced. Indeed, most of our biodiversity data sets that are long-term in Ireland are citizen science data sets. They're generated mostly by volunteers. So Explore Your Shore, we have set up 4 surveys that people can get involved in. And they're targeted at different levels. Seashore Spotter is really, if you're out and about on the coast doing whatever you're doing, walking the dog, swimming, surfing, making a sandcastle, and you see a marine plant or animal, you take a photo of it and you can upload it to our Seashore Spotter form with a little bit of information on where you were, who you are, and that goes in and goes on to our system for validation. If you're a bit more interested and you want to focus on a particular habitat, well, we have various surveys for that. We have the Big Beach Biodiversity Survey, looking at things washed ashore, which tell us what's lying beneath the adjacent sea area. So if we can't go diving, the only way we have of surveying those creatures that live under the sea is by looking at their remains on the shore. The Great Rocky Shore BioBlitz, it looks, as the name suggests, at rocky shores, and we're asking people to go out and resurvey or continuously survey their nearest bit of rocky shore and build up as many different species as they can for that shoreline. And we're trying to identify Ireland's most biodiverse shorelines. And finally, Adopt a Rock Pool is for people whose parents won't let them have a cat or a dog. You can adopt a rock pool instead. I jest. What we're actually asking you to do is find a nice rock pool and survey it each season, spring, summer, autumn, winter, and then keep doing that year on year. What that will do, it'll give us a picture of how things change in a fixed area of the shore seasonally, because things do change by season, but also over time. So things will change. The shore is never a constant. Things change year on year and as time progresses. We're into year 5 of Explore Your Shore. So how are we doing so far? Well, we've 13,300 odd records validated to date. They've been validated based on photographs submitted with the records, checked by an expert, and they've been uploaded to biodiversity maps, and they're available for you or anyone else to download as open access data. Within those data, we have 588 species recorded so far, so not too bad. And we have those from around 1,800 locations around the Irish coastline. We're always looking for more. We're looking for more records of every kind of species, the really common species and the really rare species. So any and all data is welcome. Any and all records of marine species from around the coast are welcome. What happens to that information once it's validated, once we've checked it and made sure that the photo of a beadlet anemone is in fact a beadlet anemone and not a blue whale? Well, once we're happy that the data is good, it goes to biodiversity maps, and that's the national system where you can view it online, you can download it. But we also send it to European data sets. So there's major European data sets called Eurobus and EmoNet, where all European researchers and citizen science projects contribute their data, so we get a European picture. And the National Biodiversity Data Centre is also the Irish node of the Global Biodiversity Information System, or facility, where we submit data from all around the world and build up global pictures of how biodiversity is doing. So it doesn't just sit on a laptop somewhere doing nothing. The data, once you've submitted it, travels wide and far. The other things we do at Explore Your Shore is we run training courses. So we work with, we've worked with Clean Coasts on their Clean Coasts Observer program, with Leave No Trace, Galway Atlantic Aquaria, other partner groups around the coast to train up interested groups in marine biodiversity recording. We've done that through a mixture of online seminars and webinars. We also have a free online marine biodiversity citizen science course that you can take part in your own time. And then we follow that up with getting out and about around the coast and working with local groups to show them how to identify things with the actual items, creatures, bits of seaweed in their hands, so they can see what it looks like in real life. Explore Your Shore also wants to act as a shop front for marine biodiversity data citizen science in Ireland. So we're working at the moment with 10 partner surveys to push those out and show people the range of marine biodiversity citizen science projects that are available. So maybe you've got no interest in dolphins and whales, unlikely, but maybe. Maybe you prefer jellyfish, maybe you prefer turtles, maybe you like fishing and you want to record that way. So there's a survey for almost every kind of species group. Ranges from Sea Search Ireland, looking at underwater diving surveys to record habitats and species for those bits of the shore that we can't easily reach. So volunteers of Sea Search go diving or snorkeling to record marine species. Our colleagues in University College Cork have been running the big jellyfish hunt for 20 years now, recording jellyfish and jellyfish-like creatures and bob their way around Irish coastal waters. And the Irish Round Dolphin Group have been recording whales and dolphins in Irish waters now for 30 years. So again, there's a citizen science project. If you see a porpoise or a dolphin around the coast, you can submit your records to the Irish Round Dolphin Group. That's just a few of the surveys available. What does all these data then tell us? Well, one of the things they kind of throw light on is the problem of shifting baselines. Now, what's that? Shifting baselines means that if you head out to the shore as secondary school pupils now, you head out to the shore and you look at what's on the shore, you look at what's in our coastal waters, and you'll accept that as normal. Why wouldn't you? It's all you've known. However, if you talk to someone who's a bit crusty like me, and you ask me what things looked like 25 years ago when I started diving in Ireland, and I can tell you places where there used to be beautiful reefs, serpulid reefs, full of beautiful colored worm tubes and worm bits, reds and yellows and greens and blues. And I can tell you that they're now gone. They've been destroyed in the intervening 25 years. I can tell you about sites I used to dive on where the fish used to be hugely abundant, but now there aren't many fish left. So even in my lifespan, things have changed. If you talk to your fathers, your mothers, your grandfathers, your grandmothers, your great-grandmothers, if they're still alive, you'll get a different picture of what they experienced during their lifetime, especially around the coastline. So the problem in shifting baselines is each new generation perceives what they see as normal, but in fact, they've lost the historical perspective. They've lost the knowledge of their parents, their grandparents, etc. And we're trying to avoid that by building good baselines. So a good example is the purple sea urchin. Purple sea urchin used to be one of the most abundant sea creatures around the Irish coast, particularly the west coast. There were thousands, tens of thousands, probably millions of them. They used to grow in densities up to a couple of thousand sea urchins per meter squared. They used to be stacked on top of each other like stickle bricks around the coast. Then in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, people discovered if you collected these, you could sell them to French and Asian companies and they'd export them for food. And so this happened. And a big unregulated harvesting of purple sea urchins launched off in the 1970s. And by the kind of early to mid 90s, the purple sea urchin was a rare thing on the Irish coastline. We basically wiped out all the local populations. Today, they're still a rare thing. You rarely see a purple sea urchin. You can still see the grooves in the rocks where they etched away a little hovel for themselves in the rock, but you'll rarely see the animal themselves. The good news is that over the past 5 years, we're beginning to get records of purple sea urchin from various areas around the coast. Despite that, they're still unprotected and they're still open to being harvested. We can also see news headlines like the one in the paper or in the BBC this week that shows our concern about recent rapid ocean warming. Quite alarming ocean warming that we're detecting. Climate change has a big impact on the seas around us. As the water temperatures increase, what we see is warm water species moving northward and cold water species retreating back towards the poles. A good example of this is the Portuguese man of war. Prior to about 2016, we didn't really record many of these. We get the odd one or two, but they were always a novelty. You thought about Portuguese man of war, which are a jellyfish-like creature. They're not actually a jellyfish, but they're jellyfish-like. They're also very stingy, so don't pick them up if you see them. But they were always considered a tropical or subtropical species, not something you'd find typically around the Irish coast. But since about 2016, and certainly in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a proliferation, I can't even say it, a proliferation of Portuguese man-o-war washing up around our coastline, oddly enough not in the summer, but in the autumn and winter. And so this is a species we're keeping track of as an indicator of climate change. And we're also going through all the other data that's submitted, looking for other species we can use to track the impacts of climate change. So we can expect that as the seas warm up, we'll see warmer water species spreading north, and colder water species may be disappearing from Ireland because the water temperature no longer suits them. The good news for you is that anyone can take part in Explore Your Shore. All you really need is a camera of some sort, a smartphone or a small digital camera, so you can take pictures of what you want to record. And you go out on the shore, you take pictures of anything you can identify or any different animals you can or plants you can see. Just take a nice picture that's in focus, well lit. And when you go home, you can then upload those pictures and do your best to identify them and upload them at exploreyourshore.ie. There's lots of resources online for identifying marine species, so don't worry about that side of things. And in fact, if you can't identify them at all, don't panic, because there's a button you can click on our form for a particular photo. If you can't identify the animal that's in it or the plant that's in it, you can click that button that says unidentified, and you just send us the photo and we'll do our best to identify what's in that picture. So even without knowing any marine species, you can still take part in the Explore Your Shore citizen science surveys. The forms are quite simple. If you go online, you'll see them. All you really need is a little bit of information of who you are, where you were when you recorded the species, and then for each species, you put in the species name if you know it, click unidentified if you don't, and then add your photo by clicking the little picture frame there, and you can add as many species as you like. I mentioned earlier, we have a free online course available to you, to anyone who wants to take part. It's on exploreyourshore.ie. Just click on the banner on the home page and you can take part in that course. It'll give you the basics in identifying a whole range of marine species around the Irish coastline. And you get a certificate once you've completed the course. The data centre itself produces publications to help people with their identification. So we've posters in English and Oscoilge for seaweeds and for intertidal animals, and also for bivalve shells for the Big Beach Biodiversity Survey. For the teachers out there who might go, I don't want to have to identify all these creatures. My head is wrecked already with all the stuff I have to do. We do produce swatches. So these swatches introduce you to the most commonly recorded species of, again, seashell, intertidal animals, and seaweeds. So they're available through the data center. So I suppose my closing message is give citizen science a go, give Explore Your Shore a go. Even if you submit a couple of pictures each time you go to the coastline, you're helping increase our knowledge of Irish marine species. There's a whole system set up through the data center where you're using your own email or the school's email as a unique identifier. You can build up your own database of all the animals and plants you record. So it's worth exploring, and very much give it a go, give it a try, and you can do no harm. If you get things wrong, don't worry, all the records are validated anyway. So if you call it a blue whale and it's in fact a beetlet anemone, we'll correct it before it goes out there into the wider world. So thank you very much for your time and for listening. And if you have any questions or queries, then let me know now.